Welcome to Stories from the Hearth, the podcast for tall tales and fantastical fiction. Short stories, the likes of which you might once have heard a wandering bard tell to a group of villagers gathered around the fire. Each episode will feature a brand new story, written and performed by me, Callum Bannerman. Historical, romantic, science fiction or fantasy, these are tales to transport you. Doorways into another world. Episode 2, Carcosa. $74,970,000 kilometres squared of prime, unadulterated, unpolluted, unoccupied extraterrestrial rock. That's how her story would begin. It wasn't a catchy opening line, of that much she was aware, but she was an interplanetary astrophysicist come intrepid explorer of the antimatter age, not a writer. More importantly, she was the first Homo sapiens to set foot on Terra-II, so they'd publish her memoirs if she wrote them with a bleeding potato, and they'd like it. That's, of course, if she survived. First rule of primary disembarkation on a new celestial body: scan for airborne toxins, oxygen levels, strength of gravity, UV radiation levels, presence of water particles, temperature, and general signs of life. The scan would take about 5 minutes. Funny, she thought. The United Nations Programme for Interplanetary Refuge, UNPAIR, could design vehicles fast and durable enough to transport her here from Terra-I, 3/4 of the way across the known cosmos, in an instant. Yet they had still to build a scanner which worked faster than one of those microwaves used to take to heat rations. At least, she shrugged, it would give her time to admire the view. She'd once seen a picture of a great grey-green expanse, horizon punctured by pinprick pine trees and a distant blue mountain range, cradled by the light of a setting sun. Terra-II reminded her of that very scene, except without the trees. Okay, granted, there was no sun there either, only the smallest pink moon, which illuminated a land free of mountains. Come to think of it, she'd only recalled that picture for its distinctive grey-green grass, except on Terra-II it was all grey, and the grass was gone, but for copses of sickly yellow shrub, clinging to life in patches 4 or 5 yards apart in every direction. The terrain undulated as you might expect any landmass to, dipping to her left, perhaps 10 or 20 miles away, the ground level visibility being excellent, into a low valley, and on her right, rising slightly, before curving with the sphere of gravity. She bent down, stretched a gloved hand to test the planet's surface. With a curious, though not entirely surprised raising of her eyebrows, she observed the ground ripple at her touch. On further examination, she found that if she hit the earth with a clenched fist, it felt like punching the side of her spaceship. Yet, with a gentler touch, the earth was reduced to the consistency of damp mud. She sighed. This could prove troublesome. Then again, she'd discovered less promising geologies in her time, and at least this mudrock wasn't the strangler vines of TF3, or its sister planet's molten rain. Had she forgotten so soon the gravitational anomalies of 143 Jahan, which had acted like ultra-sensitive trip mines? No, mudrock, she guessed. She could work with mudrock. Lost to the reveries of past voyages, she almost didn't recognise her scanner's completion tone, pulsating at her hip. Like something out of a 20th century dial-up broadband nightmare, the results pixelated into clarity at a painfully slow pace. She held little hope. As confident as Unpair had been about the planet, they had named it Terra-II after all, and as overjoyed as she had been to bag first dibs at exploration, this particular explorer of the antimatter age had engaged in too many failed missions to put much faith in her current one. She calmed her breathing and read.
Temperature 89.6 degrees Fahrenheit.
Good.
UV radiation index 5.4.
To be expected, the ozone layer's not been ripped to shreds yet. Good.
H2O presence atmos 0.5%. H2O presence surface 2.2%.
Not ideal, but operable. Get some more plant life in here and it'll be balanced out soon enough.
Gravity strength 4.134 meters per second cubed.
Nothing some standard issue anti-grav boots wouldn't fix.
O2 presence atmos.
This was the big one. The one which let her down most often.
O2 presence atmos. O2 presence atmos.
Oh, come on.
O2 presence atmos. O2 presence atmos. 20.95%.
Holy mother of our good lords Gagarin, Aldrin and Armstrong. She dropped her scanner to the ground. It clunked dully like the expensive chunk of silicon it was. Holy shit. Those were Earth levels of oxygen. Like perfectly replicated earthen levels of oxygen gas. This was it. This was her ticket out. Her ticket to the stars. Hands working of their own accord, she heard the hiss of neck clasps on her helmet let go of their suction. Her visor and its breathing apparatus click-clacked back, exposing her pale cheeks to the slightest of breezes. It reminded her of a cold autumnal morning back home. She inhaled deeply. The air was so fresh that it raged against her athletic lungs. Her head rushed, dizzy with the adrenaline. Holy shit. Void now of visor, the barren expanse in front no longer looked so barren, nor so far from the beauty of that recollected picture. The light of the pink moon, no longer dulled by the thick perspex of her helmet, danced across Terra-II's mudrock ethereal, floral and soft, a spritz of perfume. And like perfume, something gently abrasive touched the back of her nostrils. Something she'd known before but couldn't quite place. Her mind was reeling now, lost to wild fantasies of fame. She imagined 20-foot holograms back home on Terra-I, advertising her own brand Stimpaks, or pre-launch appearances on global talk shows, aeronautical schools of offline colleges named in her honour, and all thanks to this, the discovery of a viable planet, a newfound elegance of extraterrestrial tundra, a speck of impossibly important dust against the ever-expanding universe. Lost in thought for a second time that day, she heard the crackled siren call of her scanner a fraction too late. In short bursts of whining bleeps, the grounded scanner called to her. Now here was something she could place. That sound. She'd heard it before. With a sharp exhale, she blew the clinging dust from the screen and strained to read against the moon's reflection.
Warning. Presence of airborne toxins atmos. Hydrogen cyanide HCN. 2,900 milligrams per meter cubed. Warning.
The scanner fell once more from her hand. She had not meant to drop it, but she no longer had the strength left to grip. The something which had burned softly at the back of her nostrils now coursed through her bloodstream, smothering cell after cell as it went. Cyanide. Melting and remoulding her hemoglobin like a demonic scientist, constricting her breath. One final sliver of oxygen consumed at the last to feed her optic nerves a rapidly distorting image. From the horizon to the pinprick of pink light where the moon used to be, the night sky erupted in white, scorched by the heat of two giant suns rising above the face of the planet. And above their magnificence, directly above the point at which she stood, now slumped, now fallen, emerged as a mirage from a heatwave, a murder of black stars. She could feel a lump of twisting grey matter writhe about her skull, pulling from the bone with a scream. And before the whites of her eyes eclipsed her pupils, she witnessed one last transformation in the landscape. Out across the plains, as far as one might go before slipping off the edge of this second world, along the line where pine trees should have stood, rose 100 feet tall the walls of a gated city. Above them, the towers and rolling terraces of royal palaces soared, surrounded by churches, courtyards, and houses. It was beautiful. It was all that could have been, all that should have been. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Her cheeks blossomed cherry red, her eyes collapsed. She let out a rasp of strangled air. Inside closed lids, she saw the words she'd come to dread, clear as day, bold in that oh so patronizing red on black. They read, "Game over." The standard issue Unpair hyper-reality exploration headset hissed as seamlessly it folded back into the wall compartment. The girl on the bed swept sweat-damp hair from her forehead. Using the nubs of her knuckles, she wiped her cheeks dry. She was crying, quietly yet heavily enough that her face was wet again in seconds. Outside her window, she watched fires rage across the city. They were perpetual, exuding toxic fumes and minimal heat, day in, day out. Infrequently, one might glimpse the blue flashes of Unpair launches, streaks of unattainable hope scarring the sky, reminders to the city dwellers of their place in this world. Indeed, as the girl wiped her eyes again and peered into descending night, another rocket launch was made east of the city walls. That should be me, she thought, willing away the voices in her head, mocking, teasing, disappointed. As it flew, trace magnesium from the rocket thrusters illuminated big, black graffiti letters sprawled across the concrete boundaries of her city. They were the same as those she saw in her dreams, and they read, "Welcome to Carcosa." She shivered, recoiling at the memory branded against her frontal lobes. A city newly constructed on a world newly discovered. A noise from next door broke her concentration. In the room directly adjacent to hers, her younger brother swore angrily. He was 7. Sharing sounds of despair or short-lived victory through thin plasterboard walls was pretty much the only thing they shared, the only contact they enjoyed these days. She couldn't even picture his face anymore, though she remembered how he looked with an HRE headset on. She missed him dearly. It was improbable that such a feeling was reciprocated, however. He had been born after lights out, never known community, nor family, not the way she knew them. Why should he miss me, she thought, with a feeling like pinching numbed skin. The girl curled up against the draft, seeping in through cracked glass. She drew a coarse blanket around her, clamped one side of her face to the pillow, and finger-plugged her other ear to drown out the wails crawling jungle-like from the streets below. The nights here on Terra-I were long. After the broken promise of Terra-II, tonight would surely prove longer. Thank you for listening to Stories from the Hearth. If you liked what you heard, please do subscribe, follow, and share this podcast with friends, family, and anyone you know who could use just a half hour's respite from the chaotic energies of the everyday. If you wish to support the podcast, please consider heading to my Patreon by hitting the link in the description. Similarly, you can check out the podcast's Instagram, Twitter, and website via the links below. I will be releasing a new episode every 3 weeks, and with your help, in time I hope to upload them even more regularly. I've been Callum Bannerman, and you've been listening to Stories from the Hearth.